The Lords of the North place their trust in me to lead them, and I will continue to do so as well as I can.
John's senses had started to come back to him. He heard movement around the room, but he lacked the energy to rise. He opened his eyes to see the smiling face of Samwell Tarly. "Sam," John breathed. "Easy now. You've had a rough ride of it," answered Sam. He tried to make out what John was trying to say. His face sulked as he realized what John wanted. "Daenerys," nodded Sam. "She raised Drogon and attacked King's Landing," Sam answered. "Arya then captured Cersei, and Daenerys flew back north," Sam finished. "Where am I?" asked John. "We're in King's Landing. Gendry rode a direwolf back to Harrenhal, then your sisters sailed to come collect you," answered Samwell. John coughed as he heard about his sisters. "Settle down now. We have a lot to discuss," said Sam. "Any good news?" asked John. "Gilly's pregnant," said Sam with a smile. John turned his head and whispered, "Congratulations." Although John was happy for Sam, it pained him to think of his own wife and his own child. John quickly changed the subject. "Who's in command?" he asked. "There is no command, John. The fighting's over," said Sam. "Who rules then?" asked John. "A council has been devised, temporarily of course," Sam paused. John drew a deep breath, for he knew what came next. "You've been named King of the Seven Kingdoms," said Samwell. John did not actually reply. He gave no reaction whatsoever. "What of Ghost and Rhaegal?" asked John. "Ghost has been here with you every night, but he spends the days in the forges with Gendry," answered Sam. "Rhaegal is in the dragon pits of his own accord. We expected him to fly north, but he's remained behind," Sam finished. "What about my siblings?" asked John. "They're all here, waiting for you to wake. They'll be here soon," answered Sam. "And Cersei?" asked John. "Qyburn has confirmed she is pregnant. He's been assisting me in caring for you," Sam answered. John seemed confused by this. "Qyburn was indebted to House Stark, and he kept his pledge to honor your brother Robb," Sam continued. John was relieved at the news, as Sam continued. "Cersei's trial is scheduled for after your coronation," said Sam. He had many more questions for him, but they escaped him as his mind raced. "How am I here?" he asked. "Your wounds from Castle Black reopened when Daenerys turned," Sam paused. "All except your heart wound, and you nearly died from the loss of blood. But your heart held strong," Sam smiled. "It's been nearly 2 weeks since we recovered you," Samwell finished. "My sword?" asked John. "It wasn't on the Isle. We think Daenerys may have claimed it," answered Sam. John sighed at the sound of her name. "I have to get to her," said John. Sam had expected this. "So the kingdoms are at peace for the first time in years, and now the king will ride his dragon north of the wall to find his undead queen?" Sam scolded. John realized how ridiculous he sounded. He would revisit the topic at a later date. The days then passed as John got stronger. He had many visitors. His siblings, Tyrion, Davos, and Samwell spent nearly every waking minute in his room. The day then arrived that John will be crowned king. Sansa visited him and showed him the crown that she designed. There was a wolf riding a dragon to depict their raid on the throne room, and a weirwood tree and crows to depict his northern heritage. John was overcome despite his mixed feelings about the whole event. "Thank you, Sansa," said a grateful John. She sat opposite of him. His new crown sat on a nearby table. Sansa's emotion poured out of her eyes, enough for John to notice.
Once I asked you if Daenerys would give up her crown to save her people.
Sansa paused as John's face twisted.
I've never been more sorry to receive an answer to my question,
Lamented Sansa. John could not meet her eyes. He sadly exhaled while eyeing the adjacent wall. Sansa rose and kissed his scarred cheek. John buried his face in his hands as soon as he heard the door close. He mustered enough nerve to check his own appearance. He felt as though he had aged a lifetime these past few years. His wardrobe alone was confusing. He had the option of red and black silk or the standard leather armored tunic he arrived in. John thought the choice was obvious. If it was good enough for the King of the North, so shall it be for the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, John thought. Numerous sigils, Stark, Targaryen, Night's Watch, it was so overwhelming. John decided to dress simply and emerged from the royal quarters. John took a short walk, a long way from the throne room. He hoped no one would notice. He caught sight of Rhaegal flying over the city, and slowly proceeded to his own coronation. All the lords and ladies of the court rose as Jon entered the throne room. Sir Davos announced for all to hear, "All hail, Jon Snow, first of his name, King of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm." Jon stepped in front of what remained of the Iron Throne. He felt more comfortable standing than sitting. He was startled as the court announced, "Long may he reign." Jon then turned to Davos. "It's official then?" he asked. Davos quickly responded, "Yes, Your Grace. If it pleases the court, in light of recent events, I feel the need to address the needs of the realm," said King Jon. "The realms of men were nearly brought to extinction, if not for the courage of a few brave men and women," Jon paused. "It is my wish to recognize these heroes, as well as have their achievements well documented for future generations," Jon paused. "I task Samwell Tarly as the realm scribe, and trust his accuracy in this documentation," Jon paused. "First and foremost, I would like to recognize Sir Jaime of House Lannister," Jon paused. "His courage and fearlessness ensured we survived the battle for the Dawn. His sacrifice led to his death, and for that he shall forever be known as the Night King Slayer," said Jon ceremoniously. "Secondly, Theon Greyjoy, in the last stand at the battle for the Dawn. For his courage and sacrifice, he shall be known as the Iron Wolf," finished Jon. Jon's eyes met Yara's and young Valen's as he continued. "During the trial of mankind, many acts of bravery were witnessed. Brienne of Tarth, forever known as the Mother, Sir Beric Dondarrion, forever known as the Crone, and Sir Jorah Mormont, forever known as the Warrior," Jon finished. "Daenerys Targaryen, Mother of Dragons, relinquished her throne to save the realm." Jon then swallowed with difficulty. "Lastly, Munda Giantsbane," Jon called. She slowly approached the king as he addressed her. "There's no need to kneel. I respect the ways of the free folk," Jon said. "For the selfless sacrifice made by your father, Tormund Giantsbane, I grant you, Munda Giantsbane, the rights and privileges of a noble house of Westeros," Jon paused. "I name you the Lady of the Last Hearth, to be held by House Giantsbane from now until the end of time," Jon commanded. To Jon's surprise, Lady Munda knelt before him and said simply,
Thank you, my king.
"Are there any others?" asked Jon. Arya spoke up and said simply,
Sandor Clegane.
"Aye, the shield, Sandor Clegane," Jon decreed. After a brief silent period, Jon continued to other business. "Some laws are in need of updating, most of all, those pertaining to family," Jon paused. "From this day forward, children will take the names of their fathers, if claimed, and be in succession according to their age," Jon paused. "The concept of bastards will no longer be judgment passed on the child, but on that of the parents," proclaimed Jon. "Lastly, the wall is in disrepair, and without a night's watch to oversee it," Jon paused. "This will be a lifetime of work, and I plan to oversee it myself," said Jon. Gasps and shouts erupted from the crowd. Jon raised his hand, and the crowd hushed. "I have had leadership thrust upon me 3 times now," Jon paused. "The first 2 ended in tragedies, and I will not let that happen a 3rd time," Jon persisted. "The crown was earned by Robert Baratheon. Most would agree that the Targaryen rule had to end. Therefore, effective immediately, I am refusing the crown, as done before me by my great-uncle, Aemon Targaryen," Jon finished. The throne room was silent as a crypt until Tyrion Lannister spoke. "King Jon, you have no true heir," said Tyrion. "Quite correct, Lord Tyrion," said Jon. "I have no heir, but Robert Baratheon does," Jon finished. "Lord Gendry of Storm's End, step forward," commanded King Jon. Gendry was in shock as Arya nudged him in the direction of her brother. Sir Davos then announced, "Lord Gendry Baratheon, naturalized son of Robert Baratheon, the first of his name." Gendry was still not sure of himself until Jon climbed down to the lowest step and placed his hand on his shoulder. "Will you?" asked Jon simply. "I don't know if I can. I'm just a blacksmith," Gendry protested quietly as he stared at his boots, avoiding Jon's eye. "And I'm just a steward," said Jon simply. A renewed confidence flowed through Gendry at these words. He raised his head and met Jon's eyes. "I will," he said confidently. At this, Jon addressed the court. "Our queen's purpose in life was to break the wheel, where the rich preyed on the poor," Jon announced. "A lack of balance nearly destroyed our world. Who better to lead our people into the future than a man of the people?" Jon finished. Applause ripped through the court, and Jon knew this was the right choice. The members of the small council will need to ratify this decision, as well as all wardens, because Westeros will no longer be a dictatorship, Jon finished. Lord of Casterly Rock, Warden of the West, Jon asked. Tyrion Lannister simply stated, aye. Princess of Dorne, Wardeness of the South, what say you? Asked Jon. Elia Martell, eldest daughter of Oberyn Martell, simply replied, aye. Lord of the Vale, Warden of the East, what say you? Asked Jon. Robin Arryn also replied, aye. Brandon Stark, eldest living son of Eddard Stark, Lord of Winterfell, what say you? Jon asked. Bran nodded his head and stated, aye. Members of the small council, Yara Greyjoy, Master of Ships, asked Jon.
I say aye,
Replied Yara. Master of Laws, Sansa Stark, asked Jon.
I say aye,
Announced Sansa. Master of Foreign Affairs, Missandei of Narth,
aye,
said Missandei. Sir Davos Seaworth, Master of Coin. I say aye, said Davos. The Master of Whisperers, Lord Varys, will abstain, as he is still in recovery, announced Tyrion. Jon then turned to Gendry. There you have it, Jon said, as he lowered himself to the lowest step and motioned Gendry to take one step up. The two men shook hands as Davos announced Gendry's ascension to the throne. Lord Gendry, of House Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms and Protector of the Realm, Davos said ceremoniously. I will accept this duty on 3 conditions, Jon Snow, said Gendry. Anything, Jon replied. Will you accept the duty as Warden of the North? Asked King Gendry. I will, Your Grace, said Jon. Will you allow me to grant you a lordship as offered to you by my uncle, Stannis Baratheon? Asked Gendry. Jon could not meet his eyes. All his life he wanted to be called Stark, but he was a Targaryen. The name you shall choose, answered Gendry. Jon was perplexed, as he had not asked the question. And what of the third request, Your Grace? Jon asked. Will you rebuild the Night's Watch for modern times and rebuild the wall? Asked Gendry. I will, said a misty Jon. Very well then. I name you Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, said Gendry. I'm very sorry, Your Grace, but the Watch chooses their own leadership. It keeps us separated from the politics of the kingdoms, said Jon, as he turned to Sam. Samwell Tarly, the last sworn member of the Night's Watch, Jon asked. And Samwell replied, I am, and I cast my stone for Jon Snow, the 998th and 1000th Lord Commander of the new Night's Watch, said Sam. That settles that, grinned Jon to Gendry. Your name, then? Gendry asked. Jon turned to his family, to Bran, Arya, and Sansa. Before he could address them, Sansa shouted,
Stark.
King Gendry then announced, Houses Stark and Baratheon presided over the kingdoms for many decades of prosperity. We will return to those times, and do better, commanded Gendry. Kneel then, Jon Stark, and pledge the crown your sword, commanded Gendry. Jon was embarrassed. For the first time since he was a child, he had no sword. Jon knelt anyway, and saw a sword presented to King Gendry from Sir Davos. It's time this was returned to your family. I had intended it to be a gift for your coronation, said Gendry. Jon's heart swelled, as did his eyes, for he knew what King Gendry held in his hands. Gendry placed the blade on Jon's shoulder. In the name of... Gendry seemed lost in thought. In the name of Jaime the Father. Gendry then casually looked over to Sir Davos. Davos took position behind Jon and mouthed the words to his new king. I charge you to be just. Gendry paused. In the name of Jorah the Warrior, I charge you to be brave. In the name of Brienne the Mother, I charge you to be merciful. In the name of Sandor the Shield, I charge you to defend the innocent. King Gendry finished. Arise, Jon Stark, a knight of the Seven Kingdoms, said Gendry as he offered the hilt to Sir Jon. Jon rose and grasped the blade, waiting for Gendry to explain its significance. Gendry simply allowed him to enjoy the moment. I pray I serve you well, Your Grace, said Sir Jon. He went to stand next to his family as Gendry's coronation continued. Arya then spoke to Jon under her breath.
Father would have wanted you to wield ice,
she said. It seems a bit smaller than I remember, Jon admitted, looking at the blade. Ice was now a sword and a half, perfect for Jon's combat style. It shined as it was fresh forged from the 2 previous swords.
There was a little steel left over,
Arya admitted, biting her lip. Jon looked at her belt, and he saw the same weirwood handle that matched his own sword.
Frost. I've named it.
She said. Jon smiled at her and looked over to Sansa. Gendry was announcing remaining appointments. Tyrion Lannister, I name you Hand of the King, Gendry proclaimed. Jon looked over to Tyrion to offer his congratulations when he noticed Sansa holding Tyrion's hand. I'll have to speak to my wife regarding that matter, Your Grace, Tyrion added. Sansa then nodded her head, and Tyrion accepted his new position. Jon met her eyes, and Sansa smiled, as Jon had never seen her do before.